Your superpowers are the things you do best with the least amount of effort. They're not in the water, they're not on the mountaintop, they're not hidden under a rock. These gifts are instilled in you at birth by a gifted creator. If you can identify these superpowers, they are the gifts that will change the world. Join us to discover yours.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here this morning. Who can believe that it's the last week of our Gifted series? It feels like it wasn't that long ago that we started out, but today we'll take a look at the 6th and final session of the series. But I thought, really the way we have to start this is by going back to Romans 12, where Paul describes these grace gifts that God has given each and every one of us. So I'd just like to start by rereading that passage. So Romans 12, 3-8. Should come up on the slides as well in a minute. But Paul writes, "For by the grace given me, I say to each and every one of you, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. For just as each of us has one body with many members, and these members do not all have the same function, so in Christ we, though many, form one body, and each member belongs to all the others. We have different gifts, according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully." And so if you've been following along, it's quite evident that the one gift we haven't covered yet is the gift of leadership. And in a way, that's a really cool one, because I think some of these gifts, when I looked at it at first, you're like, oh, sure, mercy, yeah, that is a gift. But there's no question about leadership. We talk about it all the time. Someone's a gifted leader or a promising leader or an up-and-coming leader, or you can see the gift of leadership evident in their lives. And then if you go online and start looking for resources, there's so many about how to lead well. There are just thousands of books and podcasts and seminars which you can see done by really good, intelligent people. And what's interesting to me about that is it says two things. Leadership must be really important, otherwise we wouldn't spend so much time on it. But it must also be really complex and hard to get right, because otherwise we wouldn't need to spend so much time on it. But it also means that we bring a lot of our own ideas as to what being a leader looks like. It's like, I know for me, it's often easy to think that a leader is the guy who's like got all the ideas and all the answers. You think of like politicians or business leaders who have these followings of hundreds of people and are able to motivate them and spur them on to their great goals and ideals. But I think that this gift of leadership doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's more helpful almost to think of it like influence. And that's apparent in the examples I've just mentioned. Like obviously, C-suite executives, politicians, business owners, they make decisions which influence hundreds of lives. But we can also see the same if you look at like a teacher with their student, or captains and coaches with their sports teams, even parents with their children. But I think that even if there's one person who might change something they do based on what you say or do with them, well, then you could be exerting your gift of leadership on them. And so it's really important that we harness this gift well. But what does it mean, this gift of leadership? So I want to start by looking at a definition which the guys who put together the series came up with. So they define the gift of leadership as motivating others to work together to achieve a common purpose or goal harmoniously. I think this is a really cool definition. So I want to just spend a little while unpacking it. But I also really like to think in pictures. So one of the things that struck me when I read this is it's a bit like a rowing team. So hopefully some of you have watched rowing. But if you haven't, we've got a picture up here showing you roughly what it looks like. It's a really cool sport to watch, and one that my wife introduced me to. But what you'll notice if you look at these guys, there's one guy facing the wrong way. So he's called the coxswain. And he also doesn't have an oar, or blade, as I believe it's called. But anyway, his job is to steer the boat, or in a sense, to lead it. So I think we can think of the gift of leadership and how it interacts with the other gifts as being a bit like this rowing team. We have a whole body, which is the boat, and within the boat, one guy with an oar might be the gift of mercy, another the gift of encouragement, or the gift of teaching. And then right at the back, we've got our coxswain, who's going to steer the boat. And I think that that's a really good picture of leadership. So if we think back to our definition, it's firstly about motivating. And that's really one of the coxswain's primary jobs, is he's the only one who can actually see where the boat is in the water relative to all the other racers. Because if you're facing backwards and the other team is just a little ahead, they're out of your vision. And so it needs to be with us as we have to exercise our gift of leadership. It's about having a vision and lining ourselves up with Christ's vision, but then motivating the body to work together to achieve that vision. And that's then the second really cool thing about this definition, is it focuses on others. And that's important because leadership can never be done in isolation. If we imagine that we remove all the rowers from this boat except the coxswain, well, then it's useless. He's just going to be drifting down the river under the current of the river. So you need to have all the other rowers in the boat. And the coxswain's job is then to get them to shine as best they can. And so it is with the gift of leadership, as it should be there to allow all the other gifts to work to the best of their ability. And that way the body as a whole is the healthiest, strongest that it can be. And that only happens when it works together. So we all have our own gifts, but if we're exercising them in different directions, then it can quickly become chaotic. We can think about our rowing boat again. So those oars are not connected. Everyone can row at their own rate. But if one person's rowing faster than the other, then they all start clashing and everything gets shaky and unstable. So even though every person's putting in their best effort, as a whole, the boat isn't going to do the best it can do. So the coxswain's job is to call out the rhythm. And because they know where you're going, you can say, oh, this is a moment that actually we need to press on and be a little bit quicker. Or this is a moment where we can rest. And so it should be as we exercise this gift of leadership. It's seeing how everyone's working together. What gifts are people using? And how can we gel that so that we work as one body? And then the last word in that definition, which at first I was like, oh, this is a bit like clumsily tacked on. But I think it actually might be the most important part of the definition, is that it must all be done harmoniously. Because there are many ways that we can motivate others to work together to achieve a common purpose or goal. But if it's not harmonious, then it won't last. We can think about our boat again. If the way that we motivate others or the way this coxswain leads the team causes division, then although they might have a couple successful races, ultimately that team's going to fall apart. And so one of the big goals of this gift of leadership is it allows us to unify others so that the body stays together. And that way it can create lasting change and we can glorify God through it. Now, Paul tells us one other thing about this gift of leadership. He tells us the manner in which it should be used. It should be used diligently. That means with careful, steady, and persistent effort. And we can easily see that if we think about our coxswain one last time. Because if he does everything right for the first half of the race, so he's making all the right calls, he's got the boat on a nice line, everyone's working together well, and then he shuts off and he stops speaking to the boat. That advantage that they'd gained will so quickly be lost. And then the first half of effort, it's not really worth that much. And so I think this gift of leadership is something that needs to be used every day. It's not about a few moments of brilliance. It's about faithfully and persistently showing up and applying it. And that's what matters most to keep us moving forward in the faith. But now if we've been given this gift of leadership, what does it look like to actually use it and to put it in practice? So I think the best way that we can look at this is to take a look at Matthew 20, where Jesus talks about what it is to lead. So if we read from Matthew 20, 20 to 28, I see that's on the screen. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down asked a favor of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. And she said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine might sit at your right and the other at your left in the kingdom." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink?" "We can," they answered. But Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant." Now when the 10 heard this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. And Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and gave his life as a ransom for many." So what we see here is that James, John, and their mother, they've correctly identified that Jesus is the Messiah. This is the man who's going to bring about an everlasting kingdom. But what they choose to do with this information is to try leverage it to get themselves elevated into a position of power, so that as Jesus is raised up in glory, they can be raised up alongside him. And we see that this is a similar idea to what the other disciples have, because when they find out about it, they're not shocked. They're upset that they didn't think about it first. And it's a common mistake that we can all make, is to see a position of power or this gift of leadership and think that it's about authority and power. But I love that Jesus just shows us with this beautiful, simple correction that this is not so for us. And then what's really interesting is Jesus tells them what it should be like to lead. But he doesn't give the 12 Jesus rules of business. He talks about character and about service. And so from this, I think there are 4 principles we can learn, which our gift of leadership should be grounded in so that we are able to lead well. And the first is it should be grounded in love and truth. So we see that even from Jesus' correction, it's fully grounded in love and truth. We can hear this kindness in his response. Because what he's saying is actually a really tough thing to say. The cup that he refers to the disciples drinking from is the suffering that they'll go through for him. And he's acknowledging that they will suffer for him. But as much as that happens, it's not something that he can give, whether they sit at his left or right. That is only the Father. So it's not making an empty promise or sort of sugarcoating his words to make them feel better. It's just being plain and truthful, but in love. So then the second principle that we can see from this is that the gift of leadership needs to be rooted in service. So as Jesus says, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And if Jesus himself came not to be served, but to serve, then how much more do we need to use our gift of leadership to serve? Now, the third thing that it's grounded in is humility. As he says, if you would be first, you must be your slave. Now, a slave is the lowest in the socio sort of hierarchy. They are a servant to everyone, and yet they're served by no one. But Jesus says in the kingdom hierarchy, everything's inverted. So you must serve everyone to be the highest in that hierarchy. And that's how you obtain honor within that system. Now, the fourth thing that we see is that it's all about sacrifice. Because the ultimate act of service that Jesus did for us is he died on the cross for us. He gave his life as a ransom for many. So it's not just for us to be humble and loving and serving where it's convenient for us, but even when it means putting others before us so that we have to sacrifice our own ideas or ambitions for the body as a whole to benefit. And what I really love with these 4 ideas is how closely interlinked they are. Because as we are rooted in love and truth, and that truth is really important, because I think we all know what it is to love someone. But when we love in truth, that's the love that Jesus teaches us, which is able to love its enemies and those who seek to do harm to us. But from that position, it becomes so much easier to serve. We all know that, right? It's so much easier to do something nice for someone you like than for a stranger. But now, because we're rooted in the love of Jesus, everyone is someone we can love. So that service becomes so much easier. And then it becomes so much easier to be humble, because now we're thinking about how can I serve those around us? And as C.S. Lewis says, humility is not about thinking less of yourself, but thinking about yourself less. So when you're thinking about how to serve others, you'll naturally think about yourself less. And now that we're humbly loving and serving others, then sacrifice is just a step away. It's much easier to put others' needs above your own. But in saying all this, these are still really hard. To love the way Jesus loved is hard. To serve when you can expect nothing in return is hard. To be humble and to sacrifice are all really hard. But that's where the fifth principle comes in for how to exercise this gift of leadership, is it must be rooted in the knowledge that Jesus is Lord. And it's only then that we're able to enact all these other principles. So we see this even in the request that the disciples made, is they wanted to be at Jesus' left and right. So the one thing they still got right is they saw him as Lord. But we can see this even more clearly if we turn to John 13. So reading from verses 14 to 17. So at this point, they've had the Last Supper, which we commemorated this morning. Jesus has washed his disciples' feet, and now he gives them one last piece of teaching. And he says, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them." So we see that Jesus has laid out an example for how we are to live and lead, and we should seek to follow in his footsteps. But as much as we're following in his footsteps, he is always greater, and so it's always to let him take the lead. And I find this really comforting, because it takes a lot of the pressure off. Because when I see leadership in this perspective, it means that it's not about our vision and our strength using our gifts, but it's about being in God's strength, using the gifts he's given us to accomplish his vision. Even the little authority that we are given isn't ultimately ours. We can think about the exchange that Jesus has with Pilate a couple of chapters later. So now he's been arrested, he's been charged, and he's standing on trial before Pilate. And Pilate has the authority to say whether Jesus should be set free or crucified. And he lets Jesus know as much. But Jesus responds to him, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above." So although from a sort of human perspective, it looks like Pilate's got all the power, Jesus reminds us that actually it's only because God allowed him to be in that position. Which means that that's the same for us. Whether we're leading a nation or a business or a ministry or a family, or just providing support to a friend, that authority we've been given is borrowed. And so we'd best be sure that we use it in a way that honors God and gives glory to him. So then in order to lead well, we must first be good followers of Christ, laying down our lives and picking up our crosses daily. And that way, people are pointed to Jesus instead of us, and it's God who is glorified. And now I just want to spend a little time looking at this last verse, because I think it's really important. Because Jesus tells them that if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. So as Charles said earlier, we've spent the last 6 weeks looking at these amazing gifts that God has given each of us. But the point was never information, it was our transformation. Otherwise, it's a little bit like having a sports car in your garage. Like, it would be pretty to look at, but it's designed to be driven. And so it's only really when it's on the road that it comes alive. And the same can be true of our gifts. It's cool to know that you've got it, but if you never take it outside, then you'll never realize just how great it is. And that can be really daunting. But what's encouraging about it is that God's given you each of these gifts in just the right proportion for you to accomplish the will he has laid out for you. Just remember, God loves you, and he knows you. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And we know that he's a God who gives good gifts. So if that's the case, then we can be sure that there's nothing that God is going to put in our way which he hasn't given us the gifts to accomplish. And as we do this, we are able to build up the body and have an impact in bringing his kingdom to earth. So then, if our gift is prophecy, we should prophesy in accordance with our faith. If it is serving, we should serve. If it is teaching, we should teach. If it is to give encouragement, we should be encouraging. If it is giving, then we should give generously. If it is to lead, we should do it diligently. And if it is to show mercy, we should do it cheerfully. And that way the body's built up.